right, now we got all that stuff off, it's time to actually begin adjusting the valves. Now, since I have the spark plugs out, I can rotate the engine here at the power steering pump just by grabbing onto this 19 millimeter nut right here. And this, I believe, will rotate the engine. I believe it will. And try to get my eyeball on the crank. If not, you got to get down there and get a ratchet on the crank. Yeah, it's not responding to that. So we'll go down in through the wheel well and spin the crank by hand with a ratchet. But to know where to go, you need to remove this plug here, the timing cover. And it'll be difficult to show you, but down inside there you'll see a little mark, and we're going to rotate the engine counterclockwise until we see the number for the corresponding cylinder come up. This is actually numbered on this cam, so as you rotate the engine, numbers will come up and line up with that mark, and I'll show you, don't worry, when I get that ratchet in the crankshaft. But we'll rotate it around to whatever cylinder comes up, and we'll go all the way around through all 6 cylinders. Now this is the other important part, and this is probably one of the most important things you need to remember in this video, is how these cylinders are numbered, okay? Because you'll be able to look at the cylinder number here, but if you don't know where it is out here, you're lost. And this is the way the cylinders are numbered: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the way this engine is numbered. So if it comes up and it says cylinder number 2, where are we going to go? That's right back there to that guy. That's cylinder number 2. We'll adjust both intake and exhaust valves. And you're probably also wondering where we're going to get our measurements. Well, let's show that. All right, well, on the emission sticker, up underneath the hood, you'll see valve lash adjustment right here. And it says intake is 22 plus or minus 2 millimeters, and exhaust is 30 plus or minus 0.02 millimeters. Not 2 millimeters, 0.02. My bad. So those are the feeler gauges we need. I'm going to get a 22 and a 30. And that's what we're going to use to make this adjustment. And as you can see, it says valve lash cold. And because I'm just adjusting the valves, I'm just going to jack up this side just enough to basically slip behind this tire to get my ratchet end on the crankshaft. But that's the only thing I'm doing. So I'm not going to use a jack stand, I'm just going to use the jack, but also I'm not going to be under the vehicle. I'm going to be on top adjusting valves. So that's all I really need. Then I'm just going to take the tire. The key is in the unlock position, so I was able to do that. But now, I'll be able to go through this side here and stick my ratchet right through that hole. This is inside this well here, but you can see, you can just sort of push through this area of the cover. This is a 19 millimeter socket, by the way. I'm using it with my 1/2 inch, and I'm going to be turning actually clockwise on this one. This engine rotates clockwise. So I've got it all set up, and now I can, with the plugs out, I can easily rotate the engine and get the cylinders in position so that I can adjust the valves. Okay, here are the gauges that I'm going to use. I'm using these long gauges because I've always liked using long ones to do valve adjustments. I've just gotten used to it. And this is a 0.229 millimeter of 0.009 inches. And this you can kind of barely see. I have to get the angle just right, but it's a 0.302, I believe it is. Now 0.305 millimeter and 0.12 inches. So this one's 0.305 millimeters and 0.012 inches. So to give you an idea of what gauges I'm using. So now is the fun part. I'm gonna see if I can get you right down in there so that you can see what I'm seeing as far as the numbers go. I'm gonna rotate the engine clockwise using my ratchet. All right, now you see a mark coming up. I'm gonna line it up. See if I can get these down in there a little better. See what number we got. Looks like it's number 5. Super difficult to show you, but you see that number 5 and how the marks are lining up? That's what you got to do. So we got to go to cylinder number 5 to do our first adjustment. All right, let's see who is paying attention. Where's cylinder number 5? Very good, cylinder number 5. And I'm just gonna get myself a bungee cord and tie this thing out of the way to make my life a little bit easier. For those of you wondering what I moved this clip right off this mount. It's the same as the rest. You just push the little plastic tab up and pull away. But that gives me plenty of room to work up here in the front. I am going to use this special tool to do my adjustment. It has this little piece here that goes onto the adjuster nut, and then it has this little screwdriver attachment on the inside. This is the special tool that I use. It's made by Blue Point. It's a Y as in yam, A as in apple, 8895. It is a 10 millimeter Blue Point Honda valve adjustment tool. Once again, that's Y apple 8895 is the tool number. And that's what I'm going to use to do my adjustments. However, you can also do this. There's a 10 millimeter wrench and a just regular flathead. You can do the exact same thing with this. Is it more difficult? Yes. Special tools usually make your life easier. That's why they're special. But if you don't have one of these, then you could just as easily use what I showed you there. Okay, remember how important it was to make sure that we got on the right cylinder. Now, this I really can't teach you. This I can't show you through video how this is supposed to feel. I'll show you as good as I can, but really you want to make it so there's just a slight amount of drag on the feeler gauge as you pull it out. Intakes obviously are closest to the intake manifold, exhausts are closer to the exhaust manifold. So exhaust valves are on this side, intake valves are on this side. This side is going to be that 0.30 millimeter, and these are going to be the 0.22 millimeter up here at the top. So I'm going to start with the exhaust side. I'm just going to slip in behind like this. And here's a little secret to valve adjustments. If you don't have to adjust it, don't. A lot of times you're just checking, and if they're off, they're going to be off quite literally by a few thousandths of an inch or a few millimeters, you know, just ever so slightly. So the adjustments you're making are so small and so minute. You don't want to do big adjustments. Big adjustments are not going to help you. Small adjustments will. What I normally find is the exhaust valves are a little bit tight and the intake valves are a little bit loose. I don't know if that's because they're using different gauges at the factory or whatever, but for the most part, I rarely find these way out unless somebody has gone in there and not adjusted them properly. That's when you'll cure a performance problem, when somebody else has screwed it up. But otherwise, when you take this apart and it's a virgin for the first time valve adjustment, you are not going to have to move these hardly at all. And be thankful when you see something like this with an engine that's this clean on the inside, because those dirty engines, breaking those nuts loose and breaking that adjuster, it can be a nightmare. So, and if you run into that, you can try a little bit of penetrating oil, but really if it's to a point where it's so difficult to move any of those nuts, leave it alone. Don't do anything, because you'll end up giving yourself a big headache and it won't be any better than it was when you started. So the idea is to make sure that it's as good, if not better, than it was when you started. So if you have a doubt, just leave it alone. So right now I just slipped it into this exhaust valve. It's a little bit tight. So I'm just going to loosen it up just a little bit. It's just ever so slightly tight. Just going to loosen it. I'm watching the feeler gauge. I'm just feeling it. Once it bottoms out on the feeler gauge, I'm just going to tighten it. I'm still a little bit tight. I'm going to try to hold it still when I break it loose. That way all I got to do is just ever so slightly loosen. Still a little tight. I'm going to go with that. I mean, well, maybe just a little bit looser. Yeah, right there. It just slips in and out of there, out of the groove real nice. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Other sides also, it's real tough to call on this one, so I'm actually just going to leave this one alone. Remember, if you have a doubt, just leave it be. It was running fine before you started. It'll run fine again when you're out. But the idea is not to over adjust. Now this is just flat out loose. So I'm just going to tighten that one down just a little bit. Just like I said, you'll find the intakes to be ever so slightly loose and the exhaust to be ever so slightly tight. And that's about it. I just tightened that up. I just snugged that up. That's all I did. And that's all I want you to do. I don't want you to go and overthink this. The less adjusting you're doing, the better off you are. Other side is the same story. Still a little loose. That's too tight. A little loose still. Perfect. I mean, I just feel a slight amount of drag. That's when it's good. When you feel just a slight amount of drag, you're in there. You don't want it to be, you know, just pulling on it. You don't want it to be difficult to insert like this one is. Well, just caught it in the wrong spot. But just a very little bit of drag, and you're in. This one might be a little loose yet. There we go. A little bit of drag. That's all I want. And that's that. Don't overthink it. Don't make them too tight. Whatever you do, don't make them too tight. You'll burn the valves up. You'll have to pull the heads. You have to redo the valves, everything else. Not cool. But this operation is just repeated 5 more times. And I'll give you a long shot of it because, like, showing you up close and personal every single valve, honestly, I don't see the value in that. Be wasting your time because it's this times 5, what you have right here. Ta-da! Right, at this point I've run through all 6 cylinders. And for the most part I adjusted the intakes a little tighter. I adjusted the exhaust just a hair looser. But that's normally what I find. Like I said, the intakes are normally a little bit tight and the exhausts are normally, or the intakes are normally a little bit loose and the exhausts are normally a little bit tight. But it was running when it came in, so you don't need to adjust too much. Unless, like I said, somebody's gone in there and done it ahead of time and caused you some issues. Probably the thing you're going to benefit from most is knowing that each cylinder is numbered when you come up on this. So just be sure you know the cylinder numbers when you go through. Remember, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The way these are numbered, and then you just pull the number up out of that hole, adjust the appropriate cylinder, and you're good to go. Now, when you put this back together, it's pretty much reverse of removal. I'm just gonna do like a wide shot for that. In fact, I'm doing a timing belt on this also, so I'm gonna do that timing belt and jump back on this video after I'm done with that. But first I'm gonna line this up with top dead center number 1 cylinder, and then I'm going to put the spark plugs in and do my thing on the timing belt. And by the way, I already shot and have a video available for the J Series V6 here, so I'll post a link in the description to that if you're interested and you need timing belt information on this also. Now I'm going to put the plugs back in. Actually, I'm going to be installing new plugs. And these you have to be careful when you put them in, because if you just drop them down in there, you can actually bend the electrodes. So when you put them in, try to slide them all the way down in with your finger so that they hit the bottom gently. Notice I'm not putting anything on the threads. I'm not saying you can't. If you did, maybe a little anti-seize, but that's about it. Maybe a drop of oil would also help. Once these bottom out and get tight, just a little bit more, about a quarter turn once they bottom out. There's the spark plugs. Let's slip those valve covers back in. I'm going to start with this front one. And you may be asking me, should I replace the valve cover gasket? Well, I've got to say, you see how pliable this is? And how nice it is, and how these seals here they just have a nice return. They're not hard and crusty or anything. I say leave them alone. If they're this good, and these are that good, I would just wipe them off, make sure they're in place, and just reinstall them. And if you do get a gasket set, I recommend the OE set. There are aftermarket sets out there that work okay, but I know the OE set works the best. Like this one, if it's still nice and pliable and not all hard and crusty and comes out like in one big chunk and is really brittle, I would just reuse it. You just settle it over the spark plug wells and push down. I usually tighten from the center out, and I'm just going to snug them all down, and then I'll go back and tighten them all. This will allow it to seat in a little better, I think. Because if it goes on there a little cockeyed or cattywampus or whatever you want to call it, it just won't seat well, and it might cause a leak. So I like to walk a part into place rather than just run one fastener down at a time. If you run one fastener down at a time and you get it all tight, you may put another fastener in a bind somewhere. So that's why I take this approach of center outward, snug it all up, and then do a final tightening. And with these, I know there's a torque spec. I know it's not much. I wish I could tell you what it was, but I just go until I feel it bottoms out, and then that's it. I don't force it. Bottoms out, done. You really don't want to break one of these off. Remember our friend the EGR valve? Plug him back in and clip this back in. These fasteners are short fasteners for this harness bracket here. Also, we've got the one down by the alternator. Well, I'm gonna leave that off because I'm still doing the timing belt yet, but you wanna make sure that you clip that back on there. I also don't put anything on the coil packs. I just slide them back down in there. I'm doing this like I am now, so that when I'm doing the timing belt, there's less likelihood of dirt, debris getting down inside the engine. Especially with as clean as this engine is, I want to keep it that way. Once again, you don't have to tighten these so much that you're going to snap something. See that back valve cover. Some of you have been saying like, hey Eric, you forgot to put the dipstick back in. Well, no, I'm leaving that to the very last because like I said, that's like a piece of plastic sticking up, and if you're working under here, it's really easy to bump it and break it. You don't want to do that. So I wait till the very end to do that. This, you just kind of sneak it under this harness, but when you do, be mindful of that gasket, because what'll happen sometimes is it'll get caught and it might roll over on you. So just stick your hand back here and sort of feel it and make sure that the gasket's still on here, because if not, it might have caught on something and flipped around and caused a pretty big oil leak. It all feels good. Sometimes you have to look with your hands, not with your eyes. Now that the valve cover's tight, I'm gonna slip the coil packs down in there. Get our harness tied back down. And I'm just going to take my vacuum solenoid for this engine mount and flip it up here so I don't forget to hook it all back up. Kind of lives up here anyway. Remember our harness? Clip that back in place. Now seems like a good time to hook the PCV back up. All right, remember our harness over here? We can clip that back in. And I want to take my overflow. There's like a slot here and a peg here that's got to fit down in the slot in the hole. We got our special shield fastener. Now we're ready to lay our intake back in place. Just want to make sure that nothing's going to get in the way and get pinched or hurt when we do that. I'm just going to drop it down on the studs. Now let's run those fasteners down. Once again, you want to make sure that nothing is bound up. So just sort of look around, see if you've got anything that looks like it might not belong. And of course, we have our two nuts on the ends. There is a torque spec for this. I don't know it. I just know that it doesn't need to be so tight that you're gonna hurt something. I'm sure this is measured like in the 20 foot-pound range. I have just run these down with a 3/8 impact in the past and been just fine. Although I'm not gonna do that here because I don't want to set a bad example. Let's see if we can address this gasket a little bit. Got my fingers crossed on whether or not I can get it back in or not. As long as I get it in place, this isn't going to cause a vacuum leak or anything. It'll just cause a leak across the top of these two, of this plenum here. And it'll be a minor one if that. I don't know if it'll affect engine performance or not, if I'm honest. I just don't like to see things like that, but that's about as good as I can get it right now. Just going to drop our plate in place very carefully, and I'm hoping it's going to compress the gasket properly. These also have a torque spec, and some of you out there are like really into torque specs and really into torquing things down, and you're right. I can't argue with that, but I can say that a practiced hand can come pretty darn close and not cause damage. And I feel I have those practiced hands. Of course, then the argument would be, well, Eric, you're giving out information, you should give out correct information. Well, that argument also holds true, but here I am, and I say use a 1/4 inch to tighten it, don't tighten the heck out of it, and you should be fine. All right, let's tie up some of those loose ends starting in the back. We had our engine mount vacuum solenoid. This one is a short fastener. It also had its vacuum line connection, let's not forget about that. Also, let's not forget about the vacuum connection to the brake booster. Now let's do that purge control solenoid. And these are the black fasteners with the washers. Once again, this is on a rubber mount. You don't really need to tighten it so much, it's going to die. As long as we're here, let's take care of this throttle body. Slip that back on there. I can plug it back in. The air temperature sensor. Got our 2 long bolts. Once again, nice and snug without too much force. Might as well get that air box back together. You'll find that it goes together easier than it comes apart. On the air filter, you'll see up. That faces the fender. Remember, our little harness was clipped underneath here. And our map sensor. I always forget to tighten this, so I tighten this first. 10 millimeter on this hose clamp, if I didn't mention that before. A couple of things here in the front. We can put our dipstick back in now. And also reconnect the PCV hose and the motor for the intake. And lastly, we have our power steering hose that we can fish back down through here. The 2 long fasteners. And don't forget about the bracket on the back. Here's a tip to get this to go back in again, is just spray the outside of the hose with a little silicone spray. Remember, things like silicone as lubricants. And they just slide right together. No trouble once I did that. And with the exception of the engine covers, that's about it. Right, let's reinstall those engine covers. Start with the battery. The actual engine cover. Across the back, we got our long one first. Sort of slip it underneath the side over here first. Same on this side, it's got to slip under. And it's broken in 2 places, this one is. I can see why they put that in there. And last but not least, sometimes it helps to take this off. We'll top that off over here. You might be asking if I lost any power steering fluid. I didn't lose enough to really care about. Level's still fine. So I'm just going to leave that be. But if I did top it off, I would use Honda Genuine Fluid or equivalent. Now what's left is to start it up, see how she sounds. Really can't hear too much. And here, this best way I could think to check the vibration. There's a little bit of one. I wish that was a little bit smoother. But it's not bad. It's nice and quiet. To me, it sounds good. It sounds done. Let's take it for a test drive. Inside the car, there's a barely perceptible vibration, and I mean barely. So the engine mounts are pretty much doing their job. But I'm happy with it because you see what we have to go through to take it all apart. And if you do not get this correct, then that's exactly what you'll have to do, is you'll have to go back and take all that stuff apart. Let's see how she does on the road. Here goes the fun part. Yeah, it's doing all right. I'm gonna call this thing done. Let's wrap it up. All right, valve adjustments. They are an acquired skill. And when you get into the V6 models, there's a whole lot of stuff you gotta take off in order to get to the valves themselves. If the valves are all crusted up with years of gunk and neglect, I just pass. And once again, this is not really something that's gonna solve a performance issue. It may give you a smoother idle and smoother performance. So it's like the cherry on top is kind of how I think about it. So when you're doing the service, this is like that extra mile. In fact, even at the dealership, valve adjustments were not often done. So take this information with a grain of salt, do what you will with it. Practice makes perfect. Better to go loose than tight. And a lot of times all you really got to do is snug up the intakes just a little bit and maybe loosen up the exhaust just a little bit and you're good. But this 2004 6-speed runs pretty good. And I'm pretty happy with the result. And actually, after I took it out and thrashed it a little bit, idle smoothed out even more. So maybe it just needed a little breather. Sometimes they do. And sometimes they need to be fully warmed up and everything before you can make your final assessment on how well you did with your valve adjustment. But if it's off and things are too tight, it usually equates to something of a rough idle. If they're too loose, you're going to hear it. I hope this information was useful to you and you had fun watching. I had fun making. So maybe there's this nice little back and forth we got going on. Here at Eric the Car Guy, we post videos on Mondays and Fridays. And you can always find me at Google+, Facebook, Twitter, and of course at EricTheCarGuy.com, where you can direct your automotive questions to the search function with a couple of keywords, or you can head over to our forum, and we're more than happy to help you there. Free to sign up for it. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, be safe, have fun, and of course, stay dirty. I'm gonna go fix something else now. See ya.